Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Greg Smith. I'm the CEO of the Technology Advancement Center, and we are broadcasting live from our facility in Columbia, Maryland. What I'd like to do is go around the horn and introduce my distinguished panelists, starting with my right with Mr. Josh Cohen.
Thank you, Greg. I'm Josh Cohen. I'm the Director of Cybersecurity at the Israeli Embassy Economic and Trade Mission here in Washington, D.C.
And Josh, one thing that we can open up to the audience is the fact that if there are people that are interested in learning more about companies in Israel that focus on cybersecurity, they can reach out to you directly, correct?
Definitely.
Yep. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much, Josh. What I'll do is I'll go around the horn and I'll start with you, Yossi, if you can introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, thank you. So founder, co-founder, and CEO of a company called Cepio here in Maryland, not far away from you guys. An Israeli that moved here 10 years ago with roots in the Israeli intelligence and a couple of exits in my past.
Awesome. Thank you, Yossi. Tamar?
Sure. Pleasure to meet everyone. My name is Tamar Shlemak, and I'm an investor in an early stage corporate VC of Deutsche Telekom. We invest in Israeli companies, US-based companies, European companies, focusing on cybersecurity, telecommunication, big data, AI, analytics, etc.
Thank you, Tamar. Rubia?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. So I'm Rubia Onishvili. I'm the founder and CEO of Cy. We are a cybersecurity company focusing on cyber risk quantification, being able to provide very clear understanding of the organizational risk profile, quantify that in dollars and cents, and then optimize the mitigation planning. Happy to be here, also coming from a military background and looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you so much. And last but far from not least, Seth.
Sure, I'm Seth Spurgel, the managing partner for Merlin Ventures, which is a DC-based venture capital fund, but actually focused on the Israeli market. Most of our team is over there, and we focus on early stage cybersecurity companies. And like Tamar, we invest not just in Israel, we also have investments in the US, but the majority of our focus and our team is over in Israel.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Seth. So as you can see, we have a very good blend of both venture capitalists as well as cybersecurity CEOs from the Israeli ecosystem. And what I would say to all the folks in the audience right now, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will get them answered towards the end of this panel. So Tamar, I'd like to kick off this with you. And, one of the things that I find so interesting is that, over 40% of the global venture funding for cybersecurity goes to Israel. And what's so fascinating to me that if we look at the global population and compare it to Israel, Israeli has about 0.1% of the global population. How is this possible? How is this happening?
It's an interesting question. So ultimately, I think the kind of special frame of the Israeli ecosystem lays on the connection with the army, the fact that at the age of 18, most Israelis, I would say it's mandatory, but most of them go to the military. A lot of them are drafted to the intelligence units, and then they go through an extensive professional training, and they receive a hands-on experience working on super, classified, top secret projects. And all this framework kind of creates a situation where in very early age, they get to the stage where they form those little teams within those units that they graduate after the military, let's say after 5-6 years, usually in those units. And what happens is that those people already have hands-on experience of about 5-6 years. They know how to acquire talent because they literally take the people that worked with them together to their next startup. So you see a very kind of natural shift from the military to the startup nation kind of scene. And we see a lot of those exits and early stage startups specifically founded by founders that are, let's say, under 30 years old.
Very impressive. Seth, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so I think there's, I mean, the talent is obviously immense, but I think there's more to it than just that piece of it. Because if we look at other markets, right, specifically the U.S., before coming to Merlin, I spent a while working with NSA, and I mean, we have some amazing talent up there, but I think the ecosystem is different. And if I look at how the NSA works, you go in there, whether you're civilian or military, as an individual, you work there for a few years, and then maybe you leave at some point, and you're kind of on your own to go do something. In Israel, you go through this military service that Tamar was talking about, and you do it as a cohort, right? So you go in with, let's say, 20 people, you work together for 3 to 6 years, and you pop out the other end, and now you've got this cohort of people that know how to solve a problem and know how to work together. But then around that, you also have this ecosystem of VCs and entrepreneurs that have already been successful. So the entrepreneurs who have already done this and likely came out of that same unit, 8200, are looking to mentor these new people, these new graduates who are looking to start their companies. And so they kind of show them the ropes and give them some thoughts on how to do it. But they also connect them with the VC ecosystem. And Israel, I think more so than the US, has a very concentrated early stage cyber VC ecosystem where you have 5 early stage VCs very focused on that market and that have strong connections to those entrepreneurs. So you've got people coming out of the military, connecting to entrepreneurs as mentors. Those mentors connect them to these VCs that have very specialized experience in this space. And you just get this virtuous cycle going where you get more and more of these companies building up as a result.
Very interesting. So almost a little bit like Silicon Valley, but with a much more military focus. Yeah, very cool. Yossi and Ruby, coming from your perspective, both with that military background, how did you feel that, coming out of the military, how did you feel that startup ecosystem was for you as potential entrepreneurs?
Ruby, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So, connecting to the previous question that you had and the answers from my educated colleagues here, that's really the combination of not only being in an army environment and, working with your team members, but also the atmosphere that you have in the army of, you have different types of challenges, things that in the commercial world you're going to see maybe in 5 or 10 years, right? And now we are being challenged with challenges that are not solved. And that's the point, right? Try to deal with things that are considered by definition to be unsolvable and find a way to solve it, because again, this is a survival method. It's not something that either you do that and you're successful or not and you continue, right, to live as usual. From our point of view, it's really a survival method, and that's how things are being also presented in those units. So you get a challenge, you get a problem, solving the problem can save lives, and that's how you get your innovative approach, that when you leave the army, you don't think about anything else. At least from my perspective, you don't go to work for another company because it's really something that you want to change. You want to make a difference, and that's something that is very common. If you look at the size of Israel compared to other countries, and you see the percentage of startups are coming from Israel, that's something that has to be rooted in this specific ecosystem that is not only the army, it's army, academy, and industry that are connected together. This triangle is really what creating the talent, the innovation, and the strive to create more and more technology and capabilities in the industry. That's at least how I see that. Yossi, of course, you're more than welcome to complete.
Yeah, I think I'm older, so I saw a couple of waves through the industry, from the late 90s of the telecom boom to what we see now with the AI boom, and of course cyber as the main years of that. And it's a matter of first culture, as Manny mentioned, which you can call it chutzpah, you can call it in many other aspects, but you know better than anyone else because you are full of yourself. And because of that, you cannot work for someone. No one from my team will come to work for me because they know better than me. And you see from one team, you see 3, 4 companies sometimes coming to solve sometimes similar problems. So that's part of that. The triangle, as Ruby mentioned, with the academia is actually rooted and actually embedded into what we call the units, the army units. And we need to understand, Israel as army, which is like one or big organization, not like in the US that's separated into Air Force and Navy and all of that. So when we say Army, it's not the US Army, it's actually the entire organization. And 8200 that everyone now talks about, in my time it was forbidden to mention these 4 digits outside, but 8200 is as equivalent as possible to NSA. NSA is a civilian organization, but just because of the structure, it's Army. Having said that, we're not talking numbers because this is kind of a secret, but when we talk about amount of people that are in 8200 and the amount of companies that came out of that doesn't make sense, because it's like every soldier eventually created several companies. And by the way, many did. It's my 3rd company and I'm behind the curve, I guess, in some aspects. So it's a matter of culture, it's a matter of chutzpah, and it's also, as Ruby and Manny said, it's a matter of being ahead of the market in many aspects. So sometimes you're way too early and companies fail because of that. Or when you'll get with your product, you'll be the first. And if timing is right, which is a bit some luck sometimes, but if timing is right, Checkpoint is a great example for that.
Sure. Yeah. Luck is a key factor in any startup, that's for sure. Ruby, I'm going to ask you another question focused on capital. And as a multi-time cybersecurity CEO myself, it always feels to me like there's unlimited capital that's available for entrepreneurs that are starting their company in Israel. I mean, how do you feel about that? And is it true, false? And then I'll go around, obviously, to our investors as well.
So I can speak from my experience and what I see in the industry. So first of all, yes, there is capital available here, and quite a lot of it if you have something that is interesting. Something that is interesting can be either the team, the idea, a combination of two, or if you have, in a way, some kind of previous success, like Yossi mentioned before, this is his 3rd startup or 3rd company. I'm sure that it's easier to raise money over time. The first time is the hardest one, and then it becomes easier because you already proven something. But I can tell you that I've seen cases in which, just 3 or 4 smart people are gathering together without any idea, without anything, and investors are actually chasing them because that something good is going to happen with these team members, right? So sometimes you just know. From my point of view, I can tell you that I started my company bootstrap, and that was an educated decision at the time. I'm not sure that I will do that again, I have to say, right? Because it's a different path. Today, I'm very happy about it, but at the beginning, it was very difficult. So that's something to think about. So the point, from my point of view, of having capital available, that's extremely important. That's the engine that we see in this industry, because when you see money coming in, you see accelerated processes, you see products coming to market within timeframes that are almost impossible, right? Month, you have something from an idea on a PowerPoint becoming a product that is installed in one of the largest enterprises worldwide. That's something that is unheard of. And from my point of view, it's all about being able to bring in the talent, and to bring in the talent, you need to be able to finance it. And in order to finance it, you need to be capitalized. And that's part of the secret of this ecosystem. And I'm sure that, with all the geopolitical situation that we are experiencing here in Israel, people were concerned, is it going to continue and so on? And I can tell you that this is something that, from my point of view, is really a vote of confidence that you see the amount of investment that is still going on in Israel. Because again, the talent is still here, the innovation is here, and I'm sure that that's only going to continue. And it's not only early stage investments, by the way. The late stage investments that we see today, that's something that, from my point of view, is not less than amazing.
Yeah. It was interesting that in doing a little bit of research for this panel, last year there was $2.3 billion invested into Israeli cyber companies, which I think is an outstandingly large but great number for your ecosystem. Tamar, you're embedded in that ecosystem. Do you want to talk a little bit about the amount of capital that's going in?
Absolutely. So from the investment perspective, I think the panel here kind of said all three pillars that you're looking for. You're looking for the team. And in team, you mean people that have expertise, they have the ability to execute the vision, they have also the ability to attract the talent. The second pillar is obviously the technology. How do you think, how defensible it is? How do you think they'll be able to actually create the product? And the third pillar is the market. Is there a gap? Is this a big enough market? Like all those things you essentially calculate together. But I totally agree that there is one kind of key element, and it has to be the combination of those three pillars we just spoke about that have to come together in terms of assuring the investors, because when you invest, essentially what you're trying to do is you try to minimize the risk. And by going and kind of checking the boxes on all those three pillars in early stages, it's extra difficult because there's no numbers, there's no kind of benchmarks that you're, measuring yourself. So it's a little bit of a gut intuition, but it's also running the matrix on those three pillars: the team, the technology, and the market.
Got it. And Tamar, do you look at things differently because you're a strategic investor versus a venture capitalist that has their own fund?
Absolutely. I mean, we in our fund, because ultimately it is a venture capital, it's just a corporate venture capital. As every venture capitalist, we are looking at returns, but our main goal is not necessarily to create the highest returns for the investors, because essentially our LPs in the fund, it's ourselves, Deutsche Telekom. What we're looking for is we're looking for companies that can potentially either help our, Deutsche Telekom's products, clients, employees, or if this is something that can be embedded on top of a product or a service that we sell, to the market. So we've invested in our portfolio. Our fund exists about 10 years. We have invested in over 45 companies. I would say 25% of them are cybersecurity companies, but ultimately our goal is always to see what strategic value can this investment bring to our organization, to our clients, and also to the startup itself. Because when you work with early stage startups, in many cases, there's a gap of about, let's say, 2 years between the time you invest in them to the time that they're ready to work with a large enterprise client like Deutsche Telekom. So this is our goal and our job as, the early stage investors within our fund to help this company navigate through the corporate landscape.
Got it. Thank you for that. Yossi, you're a multi-time CEO, and certainly investors love to follow success. In your entrepreneurial journey, did you find it easy to raise capital from your first startup to your current startup? Or, can you talk a little bit about the financing journey that you experienced?
Yeah, absolutely. So Ruby mentioned being a bootstrap company. My first company was a bootstrap company. We ran it for a very long time and very successfully. And you think it was maybe not something to return to Ruby, and you are right. But on the other hand, investors will love you after that because you know how to manage the money and you know the value of every cent. And also, you know that you need to bring your company to be cash flow positive at the end of the game. Because exit is nice, but exit comes when the company is ready. I'm not talking about specific events. And when you build it correctly, this is, so back to your question, first one was bootstrap. We were profitable literally from day one. Our first thing we sold was cash flow positive. And I remember the first check getting into our bank account, and we asked running to literally rent our first office in Tel Aviv. And you literally count the dimes at that time. Then on the second company, we raised very little money. And we actually invested some of that from our own bank account because first you put skin in the game, but also, if you believe in your idea, you don't want to dilute yourself too much. Sector is a different story. So we started by raising several $1 million on a presentation, literally on a PowerPoint. And then we started to grow the idea to a technology, and it's deep technology in many aspects. So we needed a lot of money in order to mature a product, more money than you want to bring from home. And eventually there was ups and downs, and the industry, it's a long journey. You see the 2018 thing, and you see the COVID happens, and now the war in Israel that had some hiccup, and of course the collapse of the entire industry in 22, the VC industry. So you have an experience, so you know how to navigate through times like that in a way. I do remember calls with some investors that were very stressed in times that you're like, you'll be out of cash, and you need to manage the relationship with your investors as well. They do come with experience, and not always they are leaving the company on a daily basis and understand everything, but you need to listen. But as Ruby said, money is available. We didn't announce that yet, so it's going to be the first time that I'm talking about that. We actually closed another investment, significant investment, literally now, with investors from the Middle East, which I'm super excited to do something like that in times like that, especially in times like that. It shows the value and the strength of peace when people are fighting. But the idea of getting money is important, but to use it in a smart way. And I'm going back to Ruby, and you learn today something that you'll never learn if money will be just poured on you is very important.
Yeah, that's great. And also congratulations on the capital
Thank you.
raise. That's very exciting. Seth, you sit in an interesting chair, right? You're based here in the United States. Most of your investments are in Israel.
Yeah.
When you do invest in the United States, do you see a difference in money flow here in the United States versus Israel?
Yeah.
And in terms of the amount of capital that's being invested in Israel versus here in the US?
It's interesting, it kind of ties into your last question of why is there so much money flowing over there, right? If you look at US companies, it's actually more difficult, I think, to raise a seed round in the US in the cybersecurity market than in Israel. In Israel, there is such intense competition for the best cybersecurity startups at the seed stage, again, because you've got a concentrated market, right? It has its positives and its negatives. And here's the negative, right? When you've got 5 VCs that are jockeying for the best startups, money gets thrown around. And so what we've seen is, in the Israeli market, right, like you can raise on a PowerPoint, and you can raise oftentimes $5 to $10 million on that PowerPoint for a seed round. Whereas in the US market, there's more of an expectation of maybe you should do more of an angel round or pre-seed round and build an MVP before you go and try to raise that $5 million, which is frankly the healthier way to do it. But because we have so much talent coming out of the Israeli market, and frankly, the returns on those investments have been so strong, it justifies sort of investing there, right? If you look at the number of exits, I recently pulled like the top 10 cyber exits worldwide last year, and of the 10, 8 were Israeli, right? So like that's why people are willing to pay, including us, right, for the right investments. But I do think, I would love to see it get back to where the US is, where it's a little bit more healthier of show me some proof points before you raise quite that much money.
Man, that makes complete sense. Do you also see valuations differences between here in the United States and Israel?
Well, I think the valuations are tied to the amount raised, right? So when a company is raising 2 million, right, there's more of an expectation of a valuation in the, 6 to 10 million range. When a company is raising 7 million for a seed round, there's an expectation of, 18 to 25 million for a seed valuation, which, if you told most VCs that, 5-10 years ago, they would have said you're smoking something, right? Like there's no way that's a seed round.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So Yossi, you come out of the IDF, and I believe you or Ruby mentioned 8200. There's an amazing myth and mystery around the success that groups coming out of the military in Israel have, and the future of a cybersecurity startup. How was that journey for you? And why is that such a great training ground for future entrepreneurs?
I'll answer that. Before, I just want to mention one thing. Seth is very humble, but out of the 8 Israeli, 2 were his portfolio companies. So he needs to remember that and mention that sometimes. I joined 8200 in 91, literally several months after Desert Storm, the ones that are old enough to remember that name. And the entire Middle East changed. So, Iraq stopped being a threat, Iran started to be more interesting and all of that. That changed the entire way of dealing with intelligence, way more modern, way computerized, respect the enemy and understand they're not stupid. They may be very tough to deal with, but they're not stupid. And so it was a great time to be there, except the fact that there was still, the gas masks in the rooms for who knows what would happen later on, but eventually they got rid of these. And from very early, I came from my studies, and very early, you understand that, as Ruby said, failure is not an option. You get a project and you need to make it happen. You're not going to be punished if you fail and try again and fail and try again, but giving up is not an option. And, part of that culture gets into you. You are being filtered and screened when they find you. So I guess they find the right people for them. But eventually you look around, everyone is like you. And people are just fighting, over keyboards, over things, not with weapons, but eventually building a culture of just delivering, and sometimes delivering in time, regardless how short is the time, because there is a window to do something. You won't do it, you wasted everyone's time and money. And soon enough, you start to disrespect ranks and think you have your own opinion. And with my 2 co-founders that we work together for 33 years by now, 34 years by now, we were running behind the back of our superior commanders, or the commander, and went directly to the head of the pyramid and convinced them that the project needed to be done. And many times we were succeeding in doing that. So I guess if you do it in a more organized organization like NSA, you'll be in prison. And that eventually becomes your DNA, and then you work like that.
Interesting, very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Ruby, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I was in a different unit. I wasn't in the 8200. I was in a different unit under the C4I. It's the Center of Encryption and Cybersecurity, called Matzov in Hebrew. From our point of view, as Yossi just mentioned, there is no option to fail, right? It's just not an option. So you have a window, of opportunity. You need to make things done, and that's something, when you come to the army, you are being trained to think and know that you are the best. At least in our unit, that's the method. You are the best. If you are the best, you are able to solve it, right? And that's part of the philosophy. Then one thing that Yossi mentioned that is extremely interesting, and that was my first shock in the, let's say, civilian life, was that in the army, everyone is extremely smart, and you have talent in a level that you don't appreciate when you are in the army. Because everyone is like that. When you leave the army, then you understand what you had then, right? You understand why things worked as they work. You understand why you are delivering on time. You understand why you have this kind of innovation, because really the talent level is on a different level, something that is very hard to repeat when you're in a, let's say, in a civilian environment. So, the secret is not to start in the army, and I think that's the secret of the Israeli army. They start with recruiting and, scouting way, way, way before the army. So they hunt people when they are in their 9th grade or even 8th grade, and they know which people to identify and how to actually bring them to the relevant units. That's really the amazing thing about it, because then you come to an ecosystem that is already there. So people are there, talent is there, you have people that were there 1 year before you, 2 years before you, 3 years before you, and you see that it's just something that continues, right? So people are leaving. I left the army after 7 years, and things are still there. Everything is still working, is actually improving, and things are really getting to a level that you can't imagine. And then you go to the civilian life and you start to recruit people, and you say, hey, you know what, this guy in the army that I actually didn't appreciate, he would be now a perfect match to what I need in my organization, right? And then you're starting to chase them and see whether you're able to bring them to your organization. And that's really interesting to see. But from my point of view, the army ecosystem is really unique. And I think that in Israel, being able to go and get, when I was in the army, for example, I got toys to play with that was in the shape of submarines and combat jets and, things that are not really available now, right? So you get a 1 billion worth of a tool to play with and see whether you are able to hack into it. That's nice, but that's only in the army. Outside of the army, no chance, right? So that's really the level of trust that you get in an age of 20 or 21 or 22. Everything after that is easier, right? So that's really part of the mentality that is being evolved and developed in the Israeli people that are leaving the army.
Man, that's fascinating. That you do get to play with those small dollar toys that you mentioned. But what was more interesting to me was it almost seems like the talent scouts are out at a very early age, and that's something certainly here in the United States that we don't see. I mean, we certainly do that with sports, but not necessarily in academics, and that's something I think we're lacking. Tamar, I'm curious, and maybe you know this, or Seth, you can jump in. But if you were to think about your portfolio of companies that are based in Israel, how many of those CEO founders came out of the IDF? Is it 100% or almost all?
IDF, I think, yes, right, because that's the entirety of the military, which is compulsory. But 8,200, I don't know, Tamar, if you know your portfolio stats.
So, I mean, I think in general, everyone in Israel, again, almost everyone in Israel would go through IDF in different units. I do think our Israeli portfolio is mostly either 8,200 or those intelligence units that are adjacent, like Matzov, as Ruby mentioned. I think it's, as the panel said here, it's very, very crucial to kind of get this hands-on experience when you're very young, when you also have a little bit kind of like a mindset that you have no fear. So when you get those super kind of expensive tools or critical missions, like, top secret critical missions to handle, and you kind of understand that this is all on your and your team's shoulders, it creates a very unique setup where you have a lot of responsibility, but you also fear nothing. So you have like kind of the path open, and it's only you and your performance and execution.
Got it.
I will say, like, in terms of the makeup of the founding teams, almost every one of our companies has 8,200. I think probably every one of our companies has somebody from 8,200 as part of the founding team. But the CEO role, I'd say it's actually closer to 50-50, right? Coming from either 8,200 or, in other cases, more combat-oriented roles. But everyone has the technical founder in there somewhere.
And Seth, with Merlin, what is it that you are looking for from the founding team? Tell me the key things that you're looking for you to consider making an investment in that particular company.
Yeah. I think like was mentioned earlier, when you're investing at a seed stage, you're betting on the founding team more than anything else, right? And they may have an amazing idea, it may even be in a good market, but if that team isn't the team that's going to be able to execute on it, then it doesn't really matter. And so it's really just that attitude of I'm going to do whatever it takes to succeed, right? And it's not going to be a straight path from here to success, right? There's going to be some things I got to get around, but I will figure out how to do it. And you can help me. They want VCs that will help them do it, but nothing is going to stop them. I mean, those, it's not always necessarily obvious on the first few meetings, right? That's this team, but if you can identify those folks, Yossi mentioned we had, 2 significant exits last year with Palo Alto acquiring Dig and Talon. And those 2 founders, both of them, like we would joke that you don't stand between them and a customer because you'll just get knocked over. Like they would do anything they needed to make the sale. And that's what you want to see.
And that's great. Tamara, I know you mentioned earlier kind of a couple key things that you look for. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
I mean, in terms of the founding team, yes, you look for the ability to execute, but you also look for grit. So it's kind of like a special sauce that makes those founders extra, good at what they do. It's a little bit of chutzpah. It's a little bit, being presentable and also being able to bridge the business cultures, the differences between the business cultures with Israel and the US. It's very, very clear. Josh can talk probably hours about that, but there's also a way to kind of, make yourself more presentable to the US investors crowd. Essentially, those companies that go ahead and do those big exits. These are, CEOs, as Seth mentioned, that have a special character of being able to kind of put it all together. And the grit is the ability to work hard and never give up. And I think it's part of the Israeli DNA, the resilience. This is why this kind of mixture is very unique here.
So Josh, you've been reasonably quiet, but
You're doing such a great job.
But this term chutzpah comes up with all 4 of the panelists, and I love that word, right? Can you talk a little bit about the Israeli culture and chutzpah, and maybe give some words of wisdom to people in the audience that don't really understand that, but it's such a key characteristic in my mind of a CEO that's going to, kind of depart on an entrepreneurial journey.
Sure. I mean, there's a lot of ways you could define chutzpah. I think Yossi, had a very interesting point about constantly going around his commanders. I get that was a theme in your Army service, Yossi. I'm sure you were very popular in the officers' mess hall. But it's really the idea of doing something and not being afraid to do it that you really shouldn't, right? Being in your early to mid 20s and sitting in front of a major cyber investor or the CISO of a big company and explaining to them and insisting to them why they should invest or buy you. Just not being afraid to do that and not being afraid to fail. Kind of the thing that maybe some Americans would look at and be like, boy, that guy's a little too big for his britches, kind of thing. But in Israel, that's just very, very, very fundamental to the culture, and it's a big part of of I think why Israel is so successful. Having said that, though, this notion of transitioning sort of to the US, right? Because 99% of Israelis, the US is their main market. It's where they all want to be. And there are differences, right? I mean, in Israel, everyone, either knows the person or they're a step removed, right? And things can go very, very, very quickly, right? And your buddy, who you did military service, okay, he'll do a proof of concept or POC with you just to just so you can get it on the books and see how it works, and things move quickly. In the US, it's particularly with larger enterprises and organizations, it's much more of a process. It's much more process driven. And that can frustrate Israelis sometimes, right? I mean, they'll have a meeting and then, they're used to what happens in Israel, which is an answer at some point. It might be yes, it might be no. And here there's a silence. And what does the silence mean? How should I interpret that? And, they're not sure what to do, right? And I think a lot of the successful entrepreneurs have to understand how to kind of bridge those cultures and how to, keep enough of the Israeliness to succeed in the US and to do something that's maybe beyond their years, but also smooth out kind of the rough edges so that you don't, sort of anger people. The cyber market here is extremely loud and noisy, and the buyer types get approached hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times a month. So you sort of have to do it in a way that's slightly more American in style, and you have to have a kind of patience. So it's sort of combining the chutzpah, but adapting it to the, kind of the US culture.
Fair enough. Yossi, I'm curious.
I would like to, before we continue, may I add to a couple of things that Josh said, and being a bit of chutzpah? I know Josh for quite a while by now, and I agree with most of the things Josh always say, but Americans underestimate the Americans in many aspects, and they sometimes think that the chutzpah will not be caught or understood correctly. And I learned, I'm almost celebrating 10 years here in the US by now, moved for 1 year. And it's not always like that, because you do find, especially in cybersecurity, I would like to call them past colleagues from CIA, from NSA, from US Army Intelligence Unit and other units that maybe you worked with them or you work with their colleagues because these countries work a lot together. I found people from my past in senior levels in the top banks here as CISOs or deputy CISOs. So, and they are already ready to and used to that chutzpah or more than that even. So sometimes being an Israeli here is not as traumatic as some Americans initially thinking. I think there's a lot of culture difference, but also a lot of things that are being accepted with the good that it comes with that.
Yossi, how did you bridge that gap? Coming from Israel how did you bridge the gap coming from Israel to the United States? What lessons can you impart to the audience about that?
One thing that Ruby mentioned several minutes ago was very interesting about how much short is the time it takes to develop a product. And that's a major difference because, when we work with the large enterprises here in the US, what we call product in Israel and what they call product here in the US sometimes is very different. The obvious of documentation and training and all of that, which is very redundant in Israel because, well, he calls me and I explain to him. So that's a major difference. And we need to understand sometimes the scale of people that you need to train and the thing, it needs to be very structured, which is opposite to what we do in Israel. So that's a major difference. The second one is, Josh mentioned that, and I totally agree, the process versus I'll call him and ask him what's going on, why we're not moving. It was yesterday, why we're not moving by now. And here there's 3 weeks sometimes between a meeting and a call, scheduling a meeting for another 3 weeks from that point, which is, so they don't want it. No, they do. It's the rhythm. And the rhythm is different. And we need to understand that sometimes, there's the joke about the Israeli that will run like crazy around the building 7 times. He'll finish the project in a very short time. And the American will do it only once. but you'll do it in the right way. So it takes time to understand that. As a CEO that sits here, and my engineering and product are spread between Europe and Israel, I'm spending significant amount of my time to bridge, not between us and the customers, between us and us. And it takes time and a lot of hours of explaining internally why it's not working as they want it to be happening.
Perfect. Well, it's time to open it up for some questions. Lexus is going to read the first question.
Yeah, one of the questions coming in is, this is pretty typical of those people coming from the 8200 equivalency at NSA. But most of those folks do not go into startups, but into operations in existing companies. The difference is profound. What makes that eager group from 8200 so different?
Maybe Ruby, can you grab that, or Seth?
Yeah, I can start if you want. No problem. I think that's the question coming from David, right? David from Bank United. Okay. So hi, David. First of all, I think from my point of view, that there are maybe three components that, again, I don't know the American ecosystem coming from the NSA that well, but I can tell you based on what I know from the Israeli army that maybe makes the difference. First, the responsibility and accountability that you get in the army, meaning try and get it done. That's really the philosophy. You can fail in the, let's say, in the journey, but in the end, you need to make it done. That's one. When you come with this kind of an approach, then to the civilian world, you're starting to think, hey, maybe there is a problem that I can solve. That's the one thing that you think about. Second is the opportunities, right? The Israeli market and the Israeli ecosystem is smaller compared to the US. So in the US, you might have a lot of opportunities in large organizations and corporations, and you can actually develop yourself with a career path that goes to a very large organization. So, several years ago, I would say that in Israel, we are not building really products, we are building maybe features that then are being integrated to larger organizations. That was the atmosphere in the Israeli ecosystem, which has changed significantly in Israel, I have to say, and I'm very happy about it, because now Israel is also building big organizations or big companies, which is great, and that's how it should be. But in the past, it wasn't like that, right? It was, let's try to find a very specific problem, try to solve it, and then, we make an exit and everyone is rich and happy. But this, approach that you are able to take it, try it, and make it successful, that's something that is really a nature that you are getting in the army, because that's your daily work. Every day in the army is a startup, right? At least to me, every day was a startup. So that's really the way to think about it. The third element from my point of view is, that's maybe something that is more relevant to Israel in general. When you come to Israel, you see that everything is always in development, right? Everything is moving, right? When I was in New York for the first time, and I've seen in New York City, renovation of a building, that was something very strange in the view, in the landscape. In Israel, you see everywhere, everything is changing, you're building, and so on. So it's always a motion of we are moving, we are building, we are creating, which is something that is very maybe typical for a nation that in general is very young, right? 70 years, almost 80, very soon in several years. So that's something that's really part also of our generation, trying to create a country and build something big. That's the way that I think about it. And everything is coming, all of those, let's say, cultural elements are coming from the army, but not only for the army. It's also the approach that you get, the education that you get when you are very small, when you are a child, and going to the army. That's really how you are being educated. At least that's from my point of view. And of course, Seth, you might have.
I think just looking at the NSA and the differences there also, I think going back to the comments earlier around the ecosystem and sort of the supply chain around building startups, right? Yes, we have cyber VCs in the US, and yes, we have even some like Data Tribe that try to focus on technologists coming out of NSA, but we don't have that same level of ecosystem, right? We don't have that concentration of entrepreneurs sitting around the people coming out of NSA. We don't have the people out of NSA coming out with a group of people that want to form a company with them. And so that makes it more difficult. But I also think one of the things we haven't talked about is the government focus itself, right? In Israel, there is an active encouragement of forming these companies, right? This is a driver of the economy over there. The number of people in the Israeli economy that work in the high-tech sector is like 12%. I think the government is trying to get it to 15%, right? The amount of the GDP driven by these startups is a massive portion of the Israeli GDP. And so Israel sees that and says, we don't want to do anything to stop this. We want to do everything to encourage it. And so I think the government, I don't know the specifics on the Israeli side. I mean, you guys know this better than me, of like how tight they are around, using the knowledge you gain while in the military to start these startups. But I can tell you in the US, right, NSA has at times been hostile to entrepreneurs coming out of NSA. And I can point to some that they've even taken legal action against to try to stop them from forming companies based on knowledge they gained at the fort. And so I think that is not helping things when we already don't have this ecosystem around us to help these companies form.
So one thing I would jump in and add, Greg, is Israel actually has a government organization, quasi-government, called the Israel Innovation Authority, which is essentially making investments, in many cases substantial, in early stage startups, not even necessarily cyber, because the cyber companies, any good cyber company can get funded, but kind of across the tech ecosystem, digital health, AI, and they're not afraid to actually, do some really bleeding edge stuff and potentially lose money, right? So this, I do feel there's a notion almost of in terms of the political philosophy, there's always, culturally in the US, we have this sort of idea, well, the government shouldn't be involved in the market, right? That's pretty fundamental to who we are. And in Israel, you don't really have that distinction, right? And you sort of can't afford to have, like in a country surrounded by people who want to destroy you, you sort of can't afford to have that mentality. So there's a lot of, there's certainly, Israel can be chaotic, but fundamentally within the tech sector, you have the military and the government and, academia and the entire entrepreneurial and VC ecosystem sort of all rowing in the same direction. And government involvement is okay and accepted and in many ways expected.
That's interesting. Alexis, do you have the next question?
Yes. How effective are efforts such as BIRD, the Israel-US Binational Industrial Research and Development Foundation, when it comes to rallying startups behind specific national security R&D problems? Do they give attention to such things?
Tamar, can you potentially answer that?
I'm trying to think because in my background, I've actually performed a similar role to Josh's in New York in the Israel Economic Mission. So we have been working with the BIRD Foundation for quite some time. I'm not sure exactly how their model works nowadays, but I can tell you that in terms of the government generally, there's a lot of subsidies and a lot of government efforts around it. And BIRD is just one of those mechanisms that essentially are trying to help this, keep the R&D in Israel because it's also cheaper in many ways than to move that to the US. However, the markets where the companies are selling, they are mostly in Europe and specifically the US.
So I'll jump in and say a plug for BIRD. It's really one of my favorite programs. So first of all, it is a US government and Israeli government funded program. Both sides put equal amounts of money into it. It stands for Bi-Industrial Research and Development, where basically one Israeli company and organization and one US company or organization, it can be multiple, kind of join together and create, they each sort of have their own products, but where there's a complementarity and then jointly work to create something essentially new, a new product or service. The focus is that it should be really, kind of bleeding edge. And BIRD will actually invest up to $1.5 million into that project, right? And there has been a tremendous focus recently on, for example, quantum and AI Bird does constantly promote itself. If anyone is interested in that, definitely feel free to reach out to me. But there certainly is an interest in stuff related to national security. There's also a specific bird kind of subsector bird homeland security, where there's been a lot around drone technology and things like that. So that is out there, definitely.
Awesome. Oh, very interesting. I've never heard of that before. Thank you for your knowledge on that. Alexis, do we have time for one more question?
Actually, maybe two more. How are decisions made around funding very early stage startups in Israel? How can that be replicated in the US?
Josh, can you weigh in on that potentially?
I'm going to kick that over to Seth, actually, right? Because you've looked at, or kind of early stage. I mean, I think we've talked a lot about it, right? It's people in Israel, the early stage VCs. There's 5 kind of core cyber VCs that are kind of what I call cyber pure plays. Merlin is one of them, and that they want to focus on those early. That's what they're there for, to focus on early stage seed or pre-seed investments. And because the ecosystem is so tightly intertwined, it develops a momentum of its own. We have plenty of cyber VCs in the US, but I'm not sure it's got that level of focus. Seth, what do you think?
Yeah, I think in Israel, we tend to see a lot of the same deals as each other, which makes it a little bit more competitive. But in terms of G2's question about how are decisions made around funding, I mean, it largely is just because we tend to invest at the stage of a PowerPoint versus an actual product, it largely is looking at the founding team and how strong they are and how strong the market they're going after is. And ideally we can validate that by talking to potential customers and getting a feel for, is this something that is interesting just from a technology perspective, or is this something that's actually scratching a real itch and would solve a real problem for customers, right? I think one of the challenges we sometimes have is because Israel has so many brilliant entrepreneurs coming out of the military, right, and trying to solve really hard problems, you sometimes end up with technologists building a solution that doesn't actually map to a budget need for US buyers. And the risk can be that they validate it against Israeli buyers. And I think Josh was the one saying that, in Israel, selling into an Israeli CISO is very different from selling into a US CISO, right? It's most likely somebody you can get a warm intro to. It's such a small country. It's, your brother-in-law or somebody through somebody else, right? And so selling to them is very different from selling to the CISO of a Fortune 500 company in the US that has not just all the Israeli entrepreneurs calling on them, but also the US entrepreneurs, the European entrepreneurs, the Asian, like everybody. There's a lot more noise and they don't know you. So having these early stage entrepreneurs present to some of those CISOs and getting real honest feedback of, I'm not interested in this, or this is cool, but it's like 6 years down my roadmap of things I need to deal with right now, versus that is solving a real problem for me today. I want that. For us, that helps drive a lot of our investment decisions.
Got it. So we're coming up on the top of the hour, and I just have one question, and maybe if the panelists can each just, have a response of 1 or 2 sentences. But where do you see the cybersecurity market in 5 years? Why don't we start with you, Ruby?
Yeah. So, there are some trends that are happening at the moment, right? Everyone heard, or everyone uses now AI in their overall description of everything that they do. So obviously AI will be one of the main elements that will be integrated in everything that is possible. But when you look at maybe the concept around it, I think that the cybersecurity market will focus much more on the assets themselves, meaning protecting the assets from the assets. So data assets, availability related elements and so on. We will have much tighter kind of controls around cybersecurity, and not just the perimeter kind of concept that is long time ago already disappeared, right, from the industry, or is in some kind of situation of disappearing. From my point of view, we'll see some new challenges, quantum computing that was mentioned here and so on. So there are some challenges that are coming in, but I can tell you one thing for sure. The number of attacks, the number of breaches Unfortunately, that's not something that we are going to see a trend that will be negative in the future, but only positive and growing, because the opportunities are there, right? Everything becomes digital and more digital, and from my point of view, with more capabilities, more technology, more attacks, and more risks are coming with it, and we need to be prepared.
Thank you for that. Tamar?
Sure. So the last couple of years, I think in the cyberspace in general, were years of consolidation. And I think this trend will definitely continue in the next years. I don't know if it will be a trend for the next 10 years, but what I hear nowadays is that CISOs are looking for end-to-end solutions, more holistic kind of approach versus those feature companies that Israelis, for example, are really good at. But I think the shift and the trend of the market will definitely kind of change the way entrepreneurs build companies as well, thinking
Awesome.
holistic.
Well, thank you for that. Yossi?
Yeah, well, we see that, within 30 years, there is a cycle of we solved that problem, let's move to the next problem. We solved that, let's move to the next. But then we see the cycle starts again, and deeper or more complicated attacks from things that we already solved are coming back. So, we see that in Sepio, we're dealing with attacks that are 30, 40 years old. So we keep seeing it again and again in different shapes, in different complexities. But I think that, in one end, the attack surface is growing all the time. We move to the cloud, the AI applications and all of that. But on the other end, things that we feel quite comfortable with in terms of security becoming a problem again and again.
Very interesting. Seth, if you could bring us home.
Sure. I'll echo what Tamar said, which is I think we hear over and over that I can't layer on another tool that just is additive. I need simplification. And so this trend towards tooling that can replace multiple other things, right, and make an environment simpler instead of more complex is really where we see the market going.
Got it. Well, thank you for that. So on behalf of the audience, I want to thank all the panelists. That was a fascinating discussion. I think we could have kept going on for another half an hour. So Josh, thank you so much for putting this panel together.
My pleasure. Thank you for doing it.
We're hopefully we'll have another one of these next year.
Definitely.
So to the audience, thank you so much for your attention, your questions, and we appreciate you listening in on this fascinating topic about Israeli cybersecurity. This is Greg Smith signing out. Thank you so much.